Without a doubt, Xenoblade Chronicles is one of the more overwhelming RPG games out there. From Monado Arts to Affinity Points and everything in between, I think Ryan here can help articulate how I felt after my first few hours with the game.
What on Bionis happened there?
But even though it's a lot to take in at first, I promise you it's not as complicated as it seems, and once you get the hang of things, Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition will be one of the most rewarding video game journeys you'll ever embark on. The purpose of this video is to answer some of the biggest questions I had when starting with the game and to help clarify some of the more intimidating aspects of Xenoblade Chronicles so you can make the most of your time with Shulk and the crew. Of course, this is all spoiler free, so you can get the info you need without the fear of ruining any of this game's amazing story. Alright, let's jump right in to tip number 1. Tip 1. Talk to everyone. One thing you'll be sure to notice is the massive world on offer in Xenoblade Chronicles. The sprawling landscapes are one of the game's main selling points, and naturally, with such large environments, there are a ton of characters inhabiting them. The starting area, Colony 9, is one of the most highly populated in the entire game, and this makes it a great place to learn one of the most important habits you should form during your Xenoblade playthrough: talking to NPCs. Early on in Colony 9, and when you reach any of the game's later settlements, look on your minimap for these little dots. These indicate named NPCs, or characters that have their own name as opposed to being called Colony 9 resident or something like that. You'll want to try and make sure to talk to all of these named characters at least once. Talking to any named character adds them to your affinity chart. Details about the character will be added to the affinity chart menu, and more importantly, having characters on your affinity chart will unlock certain quests. As you talk to more people, you'll start seeing certain characters with an exclamation mark over their head. This means if you talk to that person, you'll register a new quest in your quest log. My advice: every time you see an exclamation mark, talk to that person and accept the quest. There's no limit to how many quests you can accept, so adding new quests to your quest log as much as possible is the most efficient way to adventure around the world. And completing quests is the most efficient way to gain money and experience, so it's a win-win. Long story short, talk to every named NPC you find and accept all the quests you can. Even if you don't feel like doing side quests at the moment, you'll most likely complete them automatically as you explore. Tip 2. Explore and run away. Speaking of exploring, you're going to want to explore as much as possible. Because of the game's huge living world, exploration is bar none one of the best parts of Xenoblade Chronicles. The game's many wide open areas are just begging to be explored, and you should certainly follow your instincts here, because each new landmark area that you stumble upon will grant your party extra experience points, which are especially valuable at the beginning of your adventure. As you venture around new areas, you may run into dangerous high-level enemies which might make you think you're exploring in an area that you shouldn't be. But don't worry, this is totally normal. Don't preoccupy yourself with trying to strategize or fight these strong high-level enemies. Instead, try to sneak around them, and if you accidentally engage one, the run command will be your best friend. By selecting the green run icon, you'll tell your party to leave the enemies alone and then just run as fast as you can in the other direction. In most cases, the enemies won't be able to keep up and you can escape the danger. Plus, with the way Xenoblade works, you'll automatically regenerate any health you might have lost in the encounter. The game is designed with exploration in mind, so take advantage of it. Only good can happen. You'll gain valuable experience, and you'll also unlock areas as fast travel points, which will make any backtracking you do much more efficient. Tip 3. Don't sweat the small stuff. Just like how you should run away from enemies that are too strong, you should also not bother with enemies that are too weak. Early on, I was sucked into the idea of fighting any little enemy I came across for the sake of grinding experience points. But over time, I learned this was not the right approach. The little enemies you run across will offer you little more than a waste of time. Unless it's for a specific quest, don't waste your playtime worrying about fighting smaller enemies. Exploring and completing side quests is a much more efficient way of gaining EXP than grinding enemy battles, and it's honestly much more fun too. Tip 4. Learn about Aggro. As you play more and more of Xenoblade, many of your questions will likely revolve around the battle system. The game does a pretty decent job of explaining how everything works through the tutorial menus, but something that I struggled with at first was understanding and dealing with aggro. The simplest way to understand aggro is whichever party member the enemy is attacking has aggro. Anytime you battle, you'll want to keep the aggro off less tanky characters like Shulk or Sharla, and keep it on tanky characters like Rhine who can deal with it better. Rhine has certain arts that help attract the aggro over to him, so if you're using Rhine as your main, make sure to stay close enough to the enemies and use these arts with aggro effects to ensure Shulk and the other party members don't get wiped out quickly. If you're controlling Shulk, make sure you're using the art called Shadow Eye. Using this art removes enemy aggro from Shulk, so you'll want to use this in battle as much as possible. Tip 5. Positioning is key. Alongside aggro, one of the other key advanced concepts for battle is the positioning of your characters. One of the more interesting elements of Xenoblade's combat system is that certain arts gain additional effects depending on your character's position relative to the enemy. For example, Shulk has a super useful art called Slit Edge, which lowers an enemy's physical defense if you strike them from the side. In the game's cooldown based combat system, you'll want to take advantage of any art special effects as much as you possibly can. If the art you're using has a special effect based on position, make sure you move your characters around the battlefield so you're taking advantage of that. If you see a blue exclamation mark above a certain art, this means it will have an additional effect. Arts you are in the right position for will show this blue mark, so circle around the enemy until you see these marks pop up. That's your cue to use those arts. Sometimes you'll find it difficult to move the characters into the optimal position. This is usually because the character you're controlling has the aggro. If this is happening, try to use aggro reducing arts, like Shulk Shadow Eye, if any are available, or you can move away from the enemy a bit so your main character stops auto-attacking. Attacking the enemy will increase aggro levels for that particular character, so if that character's not auto-attacking, over time the aggro will move to another party member. The aggro shift will allow your main character to get into the right position so you can utilize your arts most effectively. Tip 6. When in doubt, Shulk it out. Shulk is one of the best characters to use to help you understand aggro and positioning in battle. Using Shulk is highly effective in nearly every battle, and he has a simple combo of arts that will become your bread and butter if you end up maining him. If you are struggling with deciding which characters to use, my advice is just pick Shulk. Not only will you get to be the protagonist in the story, but you'll always be in the middle of the action in battle. If you are to learn one thing about this game's combat system, learn Shulk's main combo. This will be enough to carry you through pretty much the entire game. When controlling Shulk, you'll want to first use Slit Edge facing the side of the enemy to lower physical defense. Then, while you're still facing the side of it, quickly use Air Slash to inflict break on the enemy. Once this is done, use Shadow Eye to power up Shulk's physical attacks, and then move behind the enemy to inflict big damage with Backslash. If you decide to play as mostly Shulk, you'll quickly grow comfortable with this strategy, and it will pretty much become autopilot for you over time. You can even reorder your arts in the arts menu to make it as convenient as possible to select combos during battle. For example, in my setup here, I have Slit Edge and Air Slash lined up near the middle for easy access, with Shadow Eye and Backslash to follow on the left here, giving me an easy straight line of arts to follow. Tip 7. The level penalty. For my last tip, I want to address what I feel is a big hurdle for many first-time Xenoblade players, getting stuck on some of the game's more difficult fights. There's a common snag in the battle system that can make certain encounters very difficult for new players, and not fully understanding these is something that I believe causes many new players to lose interest and drop off the game. It's the concept of enemy danger levels. Depending on danger level, the enemy's target window will be a different color, red being the most dangerous and blue and black being the least. Don't worry so much about the specifics of what the colors mean, but the number one thing that's important to know here is about the level penalty. The bigger the difference between the enemy's level and the party's level, the harder it will be to land good hits on the enemy, which can be a killer in certain fights, making them nearly unwinnable, especially for beginning players. For every fight, make sure your party isn't more than 2 levels below the highest level enemy. If your party members are 3 levels or more lower than your target, you'll be facing a pretty serious penalty that makes the fight much harder. Your damage output and resistance is decreased, and the enemy's evasion will increase. You'll gain a lot of experience if you still manage to win a battle despite the penalties, which is great for grinding, but trust me, for the most part, it's really not worth it, especially for new players. If you're stuck on a certain battle, check the enemy's level relative to your party. If you're more than 2 levels lower, it might be a good idea to do some side quests until you level up enough to make it a fair fight. This might be bad news for those that don't enjoy grinding, but trust me, it's well worth doing it as it beats repeatedly failing in a fight your party is simply not equipped to win. And if grinding's not your thing, the Definitive Edition on Switch allows you to lower the difficulty level down to casual mode, so you can get through most fights with ease and you can continue to enjoy this game's great story in peace. And there you have it, my top tips for beginners to Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. I hope they help you feel much more confident on your adventure, and help set you on your way toward enjoying this game as much as I did. If this guide helped you, leave me a like so it's easier for more Xenoblade players to find it. And if you want, subscribe to the channel for much more Xenoblade and all things Nintendo. Thanks for watching.